Hello, welcome to a series of Photoshop tutorials aimed at intermediate level users. The first of which is going to be aimed at kind of transforming images from plain kind of like basic colors to enhancing them to be a little bit more contrasting, particularly with the use of black and white. How this video is going to work is I'm going to show you how the selection tools can be applied, how we can use like the basic sort of like image adjustments within those selections, and we're going to be navigating using the history panel if necessary. We're not going to do much with layers, and we're certainly not going to be using things like sort of like these or anything like layer masks or anything like that. We're also not going to be touching filters for now, but we will be using the selection techniques in the menus to do that. The reason why we're going to be focusing a lot on selection for image enhancement is because as you can see, if I was to take everything in this image, let's just make it black and white. If I was to start to edit it, just using those selection techniques, using the edit techniques you may already be familiar with, if you get an image like this and you kind of try and apply it to the whole thing, you can see that like we're actually, things like the sky are being lost, despite the fact that it can still be seen in the reflection of the water. There's things that I maybe don't want to have dark here, whereas I do want things like there. There's a lot of inconsistencies that can be achieved otherwise by using these techniques I'm going to show you now. So I'm going to start off just by using a kind of magnet lasso tool. This is going to allow me to select the sky. In particular, I'm just going to be going to start off with the sky. I'm then going to be using Polygon Lasso tools to select this part of the image. I might even use a little bit of select color range to go behind these letters, and I'm going to be kind of like feathering my edges out for things like water and showing you kind of like how you can kind of get things that don't have very distinctive borders and edit those. So let me start off with this this particular selection tool. I'm going to zoom in to use this because it's really important that we get it just right. If you start to click on the tops of these root tops here, the reason why I don't have to click anymore is because the computer can already detect the edges. If you actually look at the top of the toolbar, you can see values that you can manipulate. We're looking for kind of like what levels of contrast that we're looking for. We're looking to kind of like what will happen with our feathering if need be. But for now, we're just going to leave them as they are. We're going to leave them for default. But later on, with more professional use of the magnet lasso, you may want to go back and use them. I am going to start to click a little bit for kind of areas that I feel need it. As you can see, like, there are a few trickier bits to this, and the computer isn't picking up on them as well as I would have liked. But generally, it's doing quite a good job. So you can click here and there. If you make a mistake, like if you accidentally go off or you want to zoom out or something like that, you need to be aware that you can just press backspace and you can just, what's it called? Or press delete on the keyboard and it will just get rid of that for you. Right, nearly there with these, like the more difficult part of this selection. It doesn't have to be perfect, as we'll see. Let's move this along. Right, we're nearly there. Now I could use the magnet lasso up on the side of the building, but I'm not going to do that. The reason why is I'm going to show you how to add stuff to your selection, and I'm going to show you slightly different and probably more appropriate selection tools to just finish this off. So I'm going to go back to the start here. I'm going to actually use the Polygon Lasso tool now. This is better for straight edges, but just note if I start to click, it's going to just do a new selection here when I don't necessarily want that. Okay, I would actually have to hold down Shift on the keyboard, and you can see a little plus icon comes up here, and I'm going to look to add just the corners of these sorts of things. In fact, I'm going to zoom in on that, make that a little bit better. Again, pressing delete works quite nicely. No. Okay. Right, so I can actually, if I really wanted to, I could get beyond the top of this. That wouldn't be a problem. Because anything outside the canvas, like, generally doesn't need much work. If you hit enter on the keyboard, that's going to get like, everything else that we've got there. If I feel like I have done something, like here, for instance, I want to get that top of the building in, I can actually go back to my magnet lasso if I want, and I can hold down Alt on the keyboard, and that can, you know, just work into my selection using that. And I'll just go complete the loop, and that kind of can retain that little part there. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, because what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to refine my edge. This little tool here, Refine Edge, is really useful. It can be found on the Select menu too. I am going to increase my radius, which means that my edge detection is a little bit better. It's going to pick up on those edges a lot stronger. I'm going to feather it out as well, because I kind of want to blur this technique out a little bit. Not by tons, but I'm also going to use the Shift Edge sort of function here, which is going to just bring things back a little bit. That looks like it's going to be about right. So I'm now going to be using image adjustments. We'll start off relatively simple. We'll use levels. Okay, levels is a really popular technique. It's not as accurate as curves, as what we'll see in a minute, but you can generally get some quite quick results with it. These are your lights, mediums, and dark tones, if you don't already know. And generally what I find with this kind of like enhancements, though, for kind of intermediate use, you want to just kind of bring these values relatively close to the data that we can already see for the lights, mediums, and darks. That's kind of like the data that it can really work with and kind of like make the most of. Now, if I was to deselect that, select, deselect, just in case you wanted to know, or Control and D, which I've just done. If I now zoom in, you can see that my edges of the buildings have been captured really well. You know, not necessarily to a completely professional standard, but good enough for kind of like a 2-minute selection. Right, next I'm going to try and select this area here. Now, just before I get to the nitty-gritty of it, you can actually inverse your selection, which is quite useful. So say if I wanted to select everything but this, which is what I'm going to want to do in a minute, I could, you know, obviously that's what I've got. I could go to Select Inverse, and that would allow me to edit everything but that. I could maybe kind of like, you know, exaggerate this a little bit by making everything a little bit darker. I'm not going to do that, but I just wanted to just like highlight to you what Select Inverse does. It selects everything but what we've got. I'm going to inverse it back to what we have here. What I'm going to do is now I want to select the color range of this kind of particular area here. The color range is, you know, something that can be quite useful for kind of general areas of stuff that would otherwise be quite hard to do with the Magnet Lasso tool or the Quick Select tool, and we can just kind of like increase the kind of like the sensitivity to the particular color that we've clicked on and sampled here. We have to actually click on the picture to get that. I'm going to hit OK, and as you can see, what I have here is I have basically everything but the letters. There's a little bit of them, but I actually don't mind. I think this is going to look a bit more kind of like realistic if I do that. Maybe I'm going to show you curves now. Curves is slightly different to levels in that you can be a little bit more accurate and, you know, measure a few more points than just the light, mediums, and darks. You just click on this graph like a couple of points, and you can just move them in certain ways. Now, as you can see, the lower and the more inwards we're getting, it's going to get darker, and that's our dark values. And for the light values, we're going to be kind of like coming in kind of like higher and more right. Generally, you want to start off with something like an S shape, and that generally is the golden rule for kind of getting something that is relatively contrasting. However, what I like to do from there is just have a little mess on with it. This again, we've got our data that is of use here in the middle, and we're going to just adhere to that. I think that that's going to look okay. Maybe it's going to stand out a little bit too much, so I'm just going to bring it back slightly. Okay, we're looking for subtle here. We're not looking for, you know, like mega kind of like let's stand out. Let's, you know, we're not doing anything graphic-y here. It's going to just be fine. Right, so I am going to just right-click and deselect. Another way of doing that if you're on a selection technique. Okay, and you can see the results that I've got there. Now I'm going to want to work back into these letters, and it's going to be a real pain for me to do that. So how I actually do that is I'm going to go back on my history, get that selection. I'm now going to make use of that inverse function I just showed you earlier. Inverse is going to allow me to select everything but the background there, so it's going to get the letters, and it's now got this sort of like area here. I don't want that, and so I'm going to use my Alt key and just kind of like go over like these parts. Keep the letters. It's important that those marching ants, as they're called, they're still marching around those letters to show us that we still have them and we can still make use of them. And let's now refine our edge and see where we're at. Yeah, that is looking pretty much spot on. So I'm now able to just grab those letters quite easily. So I am going to go, let's maybe use brightness and contrast. That's something that we haven't used to. So brightness contrast, relatively simple enough. Again, you don't want it ridiculous, like you don't want it too high, particularly because this is supposed to be mirroring what's opposite. I don't think that this needs too much here, so I'm not actually going to edit that part, believe it or not. I'm just going to maybe just take this contrast up just a tiny bit, really, just a tiny bit. The letters, as you know, are already black, so we can afford to be a little bit bolder than it is there, purely because of the surface finish of them anyway. But I think I might increase the brightness a little bit just to cancel out that black slightly, because it is a bit more mirrored. That's it, okay? I mean, we can see the preview actually if you're interested. I think that is working quite good. Let's deselect. And I think that that's looking alright. I don't know. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I ought to kind of increase these dark values a little bit more. Yeah, that's not too bad. At least what we have anyway is we've got the kind of like the lightness in the sky is mirrored too. So we're kind of, actually it's looking pretty nice to be fair. I'm going to be showing you a technique now called feathering a little bit more with the refine edge, and just kind of show you a little bit more detail with that. It means you can be a little bit sloppy with your selection, and if you kind of like, if you want to edit something at speed, you can just go, all right, what it is? I just want to get like, a really basic sort of like increase of contrast in this general sort of area, and it's going to slowly fade that contrast out so it's barely noticeable. If I wasn't to use the refine edge and I just had this Polygon Lasso, you can probably predict that it's going to be quite a wooden outline. It's not going to look very good in terms of what I'm doing there. So as you can see, it's just very kind of like, very much just cutting the heads off these unfortunate birds there. So let's go back to it. Let's go back to refine edge. Let's really feather that out one more time. There we go. Levels is probably my favourite for this sort of basic black and white, so let's just carry on using that. Lining up with the data, stands out nicely. Zoom in out, and that looks fine. It's just slowly faded that technique out. Now finally, I'm just going to have to work on my water here. I am going to do that by using the quick select technique. I wouldn't usually teach this to kind of like a younger audience, like people in the secondary schools that I worked in generally kind of like, I don't know, a bit slapdash with it, so you can click and drag, as you can see, to select things. But some people just don't have the patience and kind of just go over things and get a bit frustrated with it, and a bit unsure about using the minus tool here. So unlike using Shift and Alt, what I've just introduced you to there is the fact that it's got a plus and a minus. I'm going to be able to drag over an area like that I want here. I'm probably going to leave that kind of reflection in there. I think that looks quite effective. However, I'm going to use the minus tool and zoom into this part here. The quick selector relies a lot more on the computer's ability to kind of like discern between like different areas with different borders. It hasn't picked up on the kind of like the shoreline here, purely because the contrast isn't high enough between the two areas. So let's go back down, let's add a little bit more to this. I don't know if I've mentioned, actually, if you didn't already know this, I'm holding down spacebar there, and that just allows me to kind of like to click and drag and pan around my image a little bit more. Let's zoom out properly. That's not looking too bad, it's looking okay. But again, because it's water and it's kind of like a bit more of a like smoother area with kind of like less of a distinctive border, I'm going to look to feather out my results here too. I'm not going to go crazy in kind of like making sure it's an absolute perfect selection, because it's going to look more natural that way. It is kind of quite literally a more fluid element. For any developers out there, I don't mean fluid as in bootstrap fluid going across the whole thing. We're talking fluid, like just visually, aesthetically. Now that is my final edit there. I'm pretty much happy with it. I think if I was to be really, really picky and zoom right in, I could have been a little bit better with the edge of, maybe this building here, taking a little bit more care of my Polygon Lasso. But for the sake of a 10-15 minute video, I'm pretty happy with the results. I've gone from this relatively bland image, albeit with lovely sort of like horizon lines, leading lines, and focal points, to something that really kind of negates the kind of like the bad weather, negates the colours, and really has a bit of an impact. I'm actually quite proud of that. I think I might kind of get that printed. Okay, so if there's anything that you think I could maybe improve on or work on, if there's anything that you think I haven't thought of, please feel free to post in the comments. If you would like to kind of see different videos on any of the selection techniques or image adjustments that I've used in this, again, feel free to post a comment and I might have time to do that. I am running this not for profit. I'm not bothered about the amount of views that I'm getting. I'm purely just kind of like interested in kind of like just getting people using Photoshop and discovering just how powerful the software tool can be. All right, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to teaching you the next one, which is probably going to be outline cutouts. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.